Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves.
Hey, what's up? It's Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast, and this is an episode of Scott's Thoughts, so I'm just going to ramble for about an hour. Hopefully you find some of it interesting, and I have a love-hate relationship with this particular format of podcast because obviously I get to talk. A lot of this is just me kind of talking through some thoughts that I have or some articles that I found interesting. Sometimes I'm coming to realizations on my own political thought process, but I don't have as much time because there's nobody else talking to smoke cigars, and I enjoy smoking cigars, which is one of the reasons we started this podcast. So I had an excuse to do something else while I was smoking cigars. And tonight, for anybody following along who's also a cigar smoker, there's this little shop in Henderson, Nevada, right outside of Vegas, where we have our second home. And it's amazing. It's called En Fuego. It's off the strip. It's in Henderson, which is a kind of suburb of the downtown Vegas area. And they've got this local blend. I guess the owner goes down to Nicaragua, I think it is, quite a bit. And they've got this awesome local blend where it's like it's a Connecticut wrapper, this Connecticut broadleaf wrapper with some type of proprietary blend from Nicaragua, I think it is. And I got to tell you, for like a $10 or $12 smoke, it is amazing. So shout out to En Fuego. If you're in Vegas and you're looking to get an escape away from the craziness of the strip, you should go there and smoke a cigar and enjoy and tell the owner that Scott Grove sent you. So maybe I'll get a free smoke when I go in there. All right. So kind of a meandering topic that we're going to go around. And by the way, shout out to my friends who, I don't even know if they watch this podcast, but Robin, I won't use her last name. Joe, I won't use his last name, even though they both know who they are. And my buddy Calvin, I won't use his last name because they are my liberal/progressive sounding board. And I love them to death. And we can have long form or short snippet argumentative conversations. And I can really see where they're thinking about things from their side of the aisle, if you will, or their side of the thought process. And I always just have good conversation with them that doesn't end in name calling or fighting or whatnot. And I was actually having a conversation with Robin via Instagram. And she's like, hey, I want to make this clear. I don't think you are a misogynist. But I think this comment that you just made about this thing that we were talking about is a little chauvinistic or misogynist. And I'm like, hey, first of all, thank you for making the distinction because she knows me. We've done business together. I think she's a wonderful person. And I think that that's a little caveat that gets missed so much in America where people are labeling the person instead of the content or the conversation or the comment. And especially in an age of social media, I mean, I put so much out here on Facebook and this podcast and YouTube. Eventually I'm going to say something that should get you canceled or something that, 6 months or 6 years from now is going to be socially unacceptable. And I think it's important to tell people when like, hey, I don't maybe like that comment, or I think your line of thinking is wrong here, or I think your argument is flawed versus you are pick whatever derogatory term that you want to interject there. And I think that's something big time that's missing from our national conversation. So just shout out to these three people who I love to death. And they really help me see the other side of a lot of issues that a lot of times I'm either not seeing or I'm not willing to see, or I'm emotionally tied to my side of the argument. I know that there's some arguments that I'm so emotionally tied to that I can't see the other side of the argument. And I try to be cognizant of that. I don't think I'm going to get my mind changed on that, but I do like seeing what other people are thinking and how they're rationalizing things and what's important to them. So anyway, just want to give them a shout out. So meandering conversation here about democracy, inflation, capitalism, central planning. And there's this quote that's been bastardized several times, and it's from Winston Churchill. And the full quote is, many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other forms that have been tried from time to time. And this quote usually gets chopped down to just, democracy is the worst form of government except for all of the other ones. And then along these same lines, I don't know if this is something, because it's something that gets credited to Winston Churchill, but nobody can really prove that he made this quote. And it very well could be somebody taking his quote and then just changing a couple words to something that you can imagine Churchill saying, which is a similar thought process of, hey, capitalism is the worst form of financial system except for all the other ones, right? And so that quote I've seen many places online, many times used in memes or arguments or what have you. And it kind of goes back to this original Winston Churchill quote. But I'm bringing this up because democracy, the democratic republic that we have here in the United States, capitalism, they all kind of get intertwined when there's an argument about, left versus right or different systems or socialism versus capitalism or communism versus capitalism. And I hope I'm going to get in the next 10 or 20 minutes here all the way around to the point that I'm trying to make, that whether it's democracy, and again, reminder to those of us who dropped out of high school or didn't finish, 10th grade civics, we do not have a democracy in the truest sense. Like, we don't have a simple democracy here in America where there's just a majority rules democracy. If you get 50.01% of the vote, then everything works out exactly in the favor of those 50.01%. We have a democratic republic where we have the electoral college and we have senators and we have congressmen and women, and we have a slightly different system here. So not direct democracy, but I think the point is still well taken here, that right now a lot of what's being talked about on the news is the idea of inflation. And what is inflation? I promise you this will come full circle. What is inflation? Well, inflation, as defined by Thomas Sowell, who I think is an amazing economist, and if you've never read his very long book, Basic Economics, it's worth a read. It's kind of like an encyclopedia size. I think it's 700 or 800 pages. But buy the hardcover, read a couple chapters at a time. It's a really phenomenal book to understand the basics of economics and how the economy works, and especially how the economy works in America compared to other systems that have been tried. It's a phenomenal book. And he defines inflation as simply too many dollars, too much money, chasing too few goods, right? So if you just go back to our old economics 101, there's too much supply and not enough demand, prices go down. Well, when there's too much demand and there's not enough supply, prices go up because there's too much money or demand for a product chasing too few products. So then Apple or Ford or Walmart or whomever realizes, like, hey, there's too much money out there in the marketplace for whatever reason, chasing too few goods. That means we can raise the prices of the goods to do one of two things: either make more profit because there's so much demand out there based on the amount of goods in the system, or to slow down consumer demand so we can catch up. So depending on who you listen to right now, inflation might be the part of, or the blame of the inflation might be cast on the government, might be cast on companies, might be cast on whomever. And unfortunately, as usual, this is falling down political lines. So if you look at Twitter, which I don't even think I have a Twitter account, but once in a while I'll kind of just peruse the trending topics. If you look at memes that are being reposted on Instagram, if you look at arguments on Facebook, the general consensus among the right, conservatives, Republicans, most libertarians, is that one of the reasons we're experiencing inflation in America and worldwide, meaning prices for everything is going up, prices for labor, prices for housing, prices for consumer goods, durable goods, everything. The reason that inflation is going up, it's effectively the government's fault for two reasons. One is that the government has just printed, governments around the world have printed massive amounts of money. I don't exactly know how to fact check this, but several people who I trust in the economic world and the finance world have given me stats as high as 40 to 50% of all the US dollars currently in circulation were printed in about the last 2 years, since we've been passing stimulus bill after stimulus bill, infrastructure after spending, both parties, by the way. Plenty of Republicans voting for this. We had a Republican president, obviously, for the first 16 months of COVID, somewhere around there. And then, now it's just doubled down and gotten worse. So I guess we only had a Republican president for the first 11, 12 months of COVID. And now we're about 11 or 12 months into a Democratic president. And they're both parties just spending money like drunken sailors, right? So you pump all this money into the economy and presumably, just Econ 101, more money, more demand. And it doesn't matter whether the government is spending that money or they're passing that on to consumers in the form of unemployment checks or stimulus checks. There's more money in the system now than there was an equilibrium of goods to service the money that wants to buy, the amount of goods that money wants to purchase. So you have that. And then you have the artificial wage problem, or the artificial high wage problem that I believe has been created by the government telling people who and who cannot work, right? So famously here in California, where I live for the time being, our governor came out and said, these jobs are essential. These jobs are non-essential. These are the people that can go to work. These are the people that cannot go to work. And now we put a whole swath of those people on unemployment, or we took their kids out of school. So now one of the parents has to stay home to stay with young children in order to do online schooling. Or we made it easy for people, not easy, we made it easier for people that weren't particularly interested in working in the first place, but had to for survival and to pay their bills. We made it easier for them to cobble together kind of this government program and this social safety net and this unemployment benefit, and they can get by for a certain amount of time, year, 2 years, 3 years, who knows how long. So the problem now is, in order to entice people to come back to work, companies, especially minimum wage jobs, service industry jobs, they've had to pay higher wages in order to entice people back into the workforce. So you have kind of these dual things at work where the government is pumping a ton of money into the economy. Now there's too much money chasing too few goods, so prices are going up, and they mess with the labor market, and now the whole thing is screwed up. That's kind of the standard conservative, libertarian talking point or thought process. On the left, what we're starting to see as a defense of inflation is like, well, this is just the normal, what they're calling transitory cycle of inflation, right? Markets go up, markets go down, things get more expensive, they get more cheap, they get cheaper, sorry, not more cheap, they get more expensive, then they get cheaper. And so the thought process from the left has been a couple things. One, these cost increases are just transitory, meaning they're going to come and then they're going to transit and they're going to go away. So yeah, the cost of gas went from averaging $3 up to $5, but the reality is that's kind of just transitory. Gas prices will eventually go down. Yeah, the cost of milk went from wherever you live, $5 a gallon to $7 a gallon, and the price of jeans went from $35 to $55 or whatever the case may be. But this is kind of just transitory, and we'll get back to normal after people return to work and the money supply kind of evens out, and there's not this big push for purchase of goods due to the pent-up demand during 2020 when everybody was kind of stuck at home, right? You can imagine a lot of people either with money or without money, with government money, with subsidies, with stimulus money. There wasn't a whole lot to spend it on in 2020, unless you were renovating your house or building a studio to work from home. There wasn't as much to spend it on because travel was diminished significantly, eating out, going to the movies. So much of the stuff was closed for so much of the country. And so the kind of current, I'll call it Democratic Party or liberal talking point is like, hey, this inflation is just transitory. Oh, and by the way, let's not kid ourselves that these companies pick whatever big evil empire you want, whether it be Chevron or Ford or Walmart. They're just gouging consumers. They just want to make more money, so they're using this as an opportunity to gouge consumers. I don't see evidence to that, or, we're not seeing companies with massively expanded stock price or value. Well, we are seeing a huge run up in the stock market, actually. So I would have to look into that. I'm going to put a pin in that and get back to the companies that are really being vilified, like Walmart. I'm going to see what their market cap has gone. I know we've seen a huge boom in tech companies in the stock market, mostly because of the fact that everybody's working from home and using more tech. But, there's this argument developing of what's causing the inflation. And I think what we can look to is this idea that anytime a government tries central planning, it fails miserably. So this is why the Cold War ended with the USSR falling. This is why every time communism has been tried or aggressive forms of socialism have been tried, they failed. And the reason for that is that central planners, whether it's the Russian government, or whether it's our Congress here in the United States, or whether it's the Argentinian or Venezuelan elected government parliament, central planners can never have their finger on the pulse of the market to the point where they can make all the decisions for the market, the consumers, the citizens, the spending, the production. Like, there's just not enough intelligence. There's not enough knowledge. There's not enough know-how in that central group of planners in order to plan a master economy. And I think that's what we're seeing, right? Is that there's always second and third level effects to the decisions that policies are making, policymakers are making. So the government decides to shut down XYZ industry because it's not essential. the government decides to pump XYZ amount of money into the economy. Well, there's going to be a lot of second and third order effects. And I think the biggest thing that we're seeing from the hubris of these national governments across the world, thinking that they can plan everything and they can save everybody and they can do all of this and they can fund all of that. We're just seeing those negative effects through the cost of inflation. And there's a video that I'm going to play. It's only 2 minutes, so it's worth watching. It's Milton Friedman. And for those of you that don't know, Milton Friedman's arguably one of the greatest economists of all time. He talks about the power and the complexity of building a pencil. And I just want to watch this quick 2-minute video, and then we'll come back to my thought process here.
The basic principles underlying the free market, as Adam Smith taught them to his students in this university, are really very simple. Look at this lead pencil. There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was a magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum. That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
So again, this is Milton Friedman talking about the complexity of what goes into a simple number 2 pencil. And what he mentioned there of the czars, this was filmed in the 70s, before the Iron Curtain fell and Russia was liberated effectively. What he was obviously referring to were the czars in Russia, where, you know, again, in Thomas Sowell's books, Basic Economics, he would talk about this idea of central planning, where the central planners would tell the minions that in order to build these generators or these coal-operated generators, you know, we have to paint them green before they go into production. And the factory would only have red paint left over. So they wouldn't paint them red because they were waiting for orders from on high, where in a capitalistic system, they would be like, yeah, who cares? Green, red, whatever, just paint them, get them out there, turn them on, get the generators working to generate power, because the cities need power because it's almost winter and people are going to freeze to death. But instead, this waiting for orders from above before business could go forward means the generators would sit idle for months or years because they couldn't get the right chain of people reporting all the way up to the government to figure out if they were allowed to paint the generators green instead of red or red instead of green. And so when Milton Friedman talks about the complexity of just going into a number 2 pencil, you can start to conceptualize, well, if somebody messes with the graphite company that he explained, if somebody messes with the graphite company, it might take you a couple months, right? But if the government shuts down business in the area where the graphite is made, it might take you a couple months to get through the entire supply. But eventually, we're not going to have any number 2 pencils because there's no graphite to make the pencils to finish the product, right? And so then you can imagine a future 3 or 4 months later as all the number 2 pencils get run through that like, oh, now you want a number 2 pencil. Instead of paying a quarter, you're paying 35 cents or 50 cents or $1. And this is how market manipulation from a government standpoint starts to screw up the supply chain and cause inflation. Now, obviously, all of us use things significantly more complicated than a number 2 pencil. And the world, the global supply chain, the global economy we live in is so much more interconnected than when Milton Friedman gave that talk on the pencil that you can imagine a small supply distribution issue in a province of China not being able to create the thing that goes into the microchip that gets shipped across the country to then be routed and wired into a Tesla that then allows a Tesla to be delivered, right? And cars are a great example of this. If you know anybody who's ordered a Tesla in the past, it used to be you order a Tesla, somewhere between 2 days and 2 weeks later, the Tesla dealership calls you and you go down and you pick up the exact car that you ordered. Now, those same Tesla orders, because of a shortage of microchips, is taking somewhere between 4 months and 8 months. I've got a buddy who ordered 2 Teslas, one for him and one for his wife, and he ordered them this summer. They were originally pushed back to September and then October and then November and then December, and now he's thinking about potentially taking delivery early in 2022, right? And for any of you that have been out shopping for a car, I've been looking for a new car for my wife for probably 6 months. And one of the things that we wanted, because we drive back and forth from LA to Vegas a lot, one of the things that we had to have was adaptive cruise control. So it's the cruise control where the sensors kind of know the car in front of you and it'll slow down, speed up, slow down. By the way, I don't care if you can afford a Honda Civic or you can afford a Rolls Royce, your next car has to have adaptive cruise control. It's amazing. It makes long drives so much less stressful and so much more comfortable to just put on the adaptive cruise control. You don't have to hit the gas or the brake and it just slow down, speed up. It's awesome. Well, the problem is when you make a car with adaptive cruise control, there's an array of additional sensors that go onto the car to make that happen. And so we've been looking for months and months and months, and we could not find a car that had that electronics package. So I've been asking the dealers at, Ford. Where else did we look? I think we even looked at a Buick. We looked at a Chevy Tahoe. And they're all saying, yeah, for that convenience package, there's just not enough chips in the marketplace. Good luck finding one. So we ended up finding a used car at CarMax that had it because somebody had turned it in, and we were able to get that. The one new car that we did find was we found a Kia dealership in Glendale, California, and a Kia dealership in Henderson, Nevada. They both had one Telluride SUV, which is a kind of middling B+ SUV. It's nothing super exotic, but it's nice. It's probably in the $45,000 range. And to buy a Kia, which is not exactly the hottest name brand in cars, if you wanted all the electronics packages, they were starting the negotiation at somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 above sticker price. So if you think about this, you used to be able to walk into a Kia dealership, and get a great deal on a car, maybe a couple $1,000s below invoice, right? And now they're starting the conversation at between $5,000 and $10,000 above the sticker price because, again, back to the economics 101, too much demand, not enough supply because the supply chain has been messed with. Think of the pencil and these chips that are coming from China, and then battery components that are coming from Africa. You mess with the global supply chain, and this is what happens. And this stuff has real ramifications because, okay, great. Scott and his wife can't buy a new car. Woe is me, right? Wah. But when I was at the Kia dealership, I was talking to the salesman and I was like, hey man, like what's the story? I just can't bring myself. It's against my ethos to overpay for a car. Like I pride myself on negotiating for a good deal on cars. What's the deal? And he's like, well, at this dealership, ironically, I had almost the same exact conversation in Glendale and in Henderson. At this dealership, we usually stock about 200 to 300 cars. Currently, we have 18 on the lot. And again, woe is me. I can't buy a new car, whatever. But I said to the car guy, I was like, hey man, like, are you at least getting the extra $5,000 when you do sell one of these cars? Because I have to imagine this sucks for you, right? The guy who's working at the car dealership. And he's like, yeah, man. He's like, I'm going broke. I'm applying for other jobs. And that $5,000 doesn't go to me because the overhead of this building, the overhead of having to have a receptionist, the overhead of having to keep the lights on, you know, when we used to make $1,000 a car, but we were selling 200 a month, and now we're selling 20 a month, you know, we got to make 5,000 a car just to keep the lights on. He's like, they spiff me an extra, I think it was $300 at one and $500 at the other, out of that markup, but it's not enough to make up for the volume that I used to sell as a car salesman. And so, you know, I talked about this on the podcast, and I wish I knew what episode it was because I would go back and reference it. When especially the state of California started picking, well, what jobs are essential and what jobs are non-essential? It's like the hubris, the ignorance. And I immediately thought of this iPencil clip with Milton Friedman because I'm like, okay, so let's do this thought experiment. Food's obviously essential. So grocery store workers can go to the grocery store. But guess where the chicken breast comes from? Well, it comes from a farm probably halfway across the country. Okay, well, then those farmers are essential, right? Well, yeah, but those cars got to come on that chicken has to come on a truck from halfway across the country. All right, so the truck driver is essential. All right, but I don't know if you've ever driven on the freeways in LA or anywhere across country. There's blown out semi tires everywhere. If you drive a lot like I do, you've probably seen a semi blow out a tire on a freeway, right? A lot of tires, a lot of weight on the tires, a lot of wear and tear on the tires. They blow out. Food cannot get from point A to point B in the truck if the truck doesn't have tires. So now the guy who installs tires, that guy's pretty freaking essential. All right, well, what about the guy who works at the rubber factory where they make the tires? If we don't have tires to put on the truck to get the chicken to the store, then we don't have chicken at the store, which is pretty essential for people to be able to eat, right? So you can see how this goes all the way down the path to where every job in America is essential, right? Everything is essential. And I've brought this up before, and I don't use any identifying information or their names or anything like that. But during COVID, I had 3 friends who committed suicide. And little did I know that those people were frequently or historically dealing with mental health issues, but they had found a way to work with it. You know, one was probably strong involvement in the church. One was really strong involvement in a CrossFit community and kind of the gym that this person belonged to. And another one, as odd as it sounds, they just loved going to their kind of menial job, right? Which many of us would consider low paying or minimum wage or menial. Take away all those things, close down the churches, close down the CrossFit gyms, close down this person's job because it wasn't deemed essential. Well, guess what? It was pretty fucking essential to them to keep their mental health going so that they didn't off themselves. And so, you know, I bring this all up because both Republicans and Democrats in their own way have this thought of like, well, we can save you if we just do things our way. If we're just the group that's in power and allowed to put out the master plan, then we'll be able to solve all your problems. And it's like, no, you won't. The market is too complex. The supply chain is too complex. The economy, the free market, the system that we've built in America and tried to expand to much of the world, it's too complex. The couple thousand of you that are in Congress, in the White House, the deep staters, meaning all the staffers that work for these people, you guys aren't that fucking smart. Like, you can't make all the decisions for the national and world economy. And Gavin Newsom, you sure as heck can't make all the decisions for the state of California, which is about the 10th largest economy in the entire country, and think it's all going to be okay. And I've had this article up by Wired the whole time I've been talking, because it talks about this idea of the chip shortage, right? The chip shortage drags on and on. So in between you and I, you, the person watching this, and me, the person recording this, within this microphone, within the soundboard that we have recording the sound, within the computers that we're going to edit this on, within the servers we're going to upload this to at Facebook and Amazon and wherever else we disseminate this, to the cell phone towers that get the signal out that allows you to watch this on your computer or your phone. All the microchips and semiconductors that go into just getting this silly little podcast from point A to point B, there's probably, I would guess there's millions of semiconductors and microchips involved in the production, distribution, transferability. I think I might have made that word up. And the consumption on your side electronically, right? So what do? You put the whole world economy basically on pause for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on what country or state you're in. And no shit, we're going to have a shortage of these semiconductors, right? And we're going to have a shortage of these microchips. And we're going to reference this, both this Milton Friedman video and also this article from Wired, because it talks about, hey, you mess up the supply chain, right? And on top of messing up the supply chain, you skyrocket demand. Because remember, going back to the definition of inflation, too much money chasing too few goods. Well, guess what? You had pent-up demand from people that were stuck at home that wanted to spend some of this money. You got the American government and many other governments just pumping trillions of dollars into the system, a lot of which goes to buy goods that have semiconductors and microchips in them. And then you have a huge upswing of people that are working digitally from their home, right? So you got to get upgraded routers for your internet. Maybe you bought a new home computer because you're working more from home. Maybe you bought a new monitor because you don't have the fancy monitor you used to have at your office, right? So huge upswing in demand, huge influx of cash, huge shortage of consumer chips. And this article does a really good job of detailing, like, this is going to be an ongoing problem for a couple of years because it takes up to 2 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build new semiconductor plants. So we've got a real problem. And circling all the way back around of that left versus right argument, the fact that certain news media outlets are trying to explain to people or argue to people that this is going to be just transitory inflation. Like, don't worry about it. Prices are up a little bit, but they'll go back down. I think it's malarkey. I think it's bullshit. I think the increased wages, the increased cost of housing, the increased cost of cars, the lack of electronics, which means the electronics that are entering the market are getting more expensive. I think it's going to be an ongoing problem for a long time. And I've mentioned this before. The Morning Brew is one of the daily newsletters that I get by email that just has great content every day. A little bit of politics, a little bit of technology, and surprise, Price is Raised. This came out November 10th, so it's about a month old. We're filming this in December 2021. Prices rise at their fastest pace in more than 30 years, putting more pressure on the Federal Reserve to do something. And I want you to think about this for the people that are in minimum wage, low wage, service industry jobs. Not only did you put them out of work for a year, some places longer, and mess with their ability to earn money, and then told them it's going to be okay because the government will send you a $600 check a couple times throughout the year. So not only did you put pressure on their income side of the balance sheet, now because of inflation, you're putting a lot of pressure on their debt side of the balance sheet, their cash flow side of the balance sheet, meaning how much stuff costs. And then everybody's going to be surprised when the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. No, it's not a surprise. It's the hubris of governments and this idea that they think that they can do central planning and that everything will be okay. It won't be okay. Let the market do its thing. Everybody in America should know how to deal with the current pandemic and their current individual health choices and health concerns. Let the market get back to the market. Stop any type of lockdowns. Stop any type of interference with what the market is doing, and stop just printing money for the sake of printing money. All right, enough about that. In the same vein of inflation, why do things get more expensive? I would argue that one of the reasons that things get more expensive is because of unneeded regulation and frivolous lawsuits. So I got this notice, and to be clear, I like that there's an EPA. I like that there's some regulation that companies just can't dump a bunch of sludge into the ocean. I remember being where was I surfing? I was surfing in, I think it was Huntington Beach one time. And we were off the coast, and then all of a sudden there was this putrid smell in the ocean. And everybody on the beach got out of the water, went up to the showers, washed off ourselves and our surfboard, and there was this weird, disgusting, slimy film. And it turned out that like some sewage pipe from one of the municipalities had burst and just dumped a ton of quasi-treated chemicals and sewage into the ocean. It was disgusting. It made me kind of sick to my stomach for a couple of days. Not physically sick, but just the thought of like surfing through sewage kind of made me stomach turn. So I'm glad that there's regulations, some regulations. But I think sometimes that pendulum swings too far, right? And the regulations create a lot of additional business expenses that don't really need to exist. Another thing that I think creates a lot of additional business expenses that don't need to exist is frivolous class action lawsuits. So I use Zoom a lot. Shout out to Chris DeRosa, who got me on Zoom about 7 years ago before it was cool. So we've been using Zoom for a long time for office meetings, for client meetings, for coaching sessions. And I've been a big fan of their platform. I've been a big fan of their customer service response. I've been a big fan of like their full disclosure about what they do well and what they don't do well and what they've been working on. And at the end of the day, guys, we all know if you're putting anything out there on the internet, there's a chance that it's not private. Like, that's just the end. I don't care if somebody claims to have end-to-end encryption. I don't care if you think it's private. I don't care if you tag that Facebook post and put it where it's only for your friends or only for you to see. It doesn't matter. Glitches happen, mistakes happen. Technology is moving so fast, we can't expect them to think of everything up front or fix everything immediately. And this stuff is kind of like you're building the plane on the flight over the ocean, right? So Zoom, apparently, because I've been a user for so long, I got this notification of class action. If you've used Zoom in the last 7 years, 6 years, or was it 4 years, from March of 2016 to July of 2021. So if you've used this over the last 5 years, you may be entitled to compensation, blah, 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 blah. So it turns out, and by the way, we can just look up the case number here. So case number, yeah, here we go. Always go to the source document if you can. Here we go. Zoom meeting class action settlement. Let's see what they're accused of. This is just recitals. It says who sued who did what, whereas. Okay, here we go. Whereas the action arises from 4 central theories of alleged misconduct or conduct by Zoom, which obviously if they won the class action lawsuit and there's a bunch of money now being paid out to people that use Zoom, then it was misconduct. Alleged unauthorized sharing of users' information with third parties through incorporation of software development kits. Alleged unauthorized sharing of users' information with third parties through third-party developers. Alleged failure to prevent unwanted meeting disruptions by third parties, and alleged misrepresentations of Zoom providing end-to-end encryption. I happen to know exactly what this is because we've dealt with problems with Zoom since the beginning, because like I said, they're constantly fixing things on the fly. And one of the things that Zoom lets you do as a service, huge benefit add, I've used it in a big way in my business. You can go live on Zoom, and then there's a couple plugins where you can go live on Zoom in Facebook. You can go live in Zoom on YouTube. You can go live on Zoom here. You can plug in different third parties when you use Zoom through some of these third-party development kits. And I remember you used to just be able to do it, click, 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 click. And then at some point about a year or 2 years ago, this thing popped up where even though I was the meeting organizer, even though I was the one that clicked broadcast this live on Facebook, you have to now click this new button that says, please acknowledge that you're going live on Facebook. It's like, duh, it's my account linked to my Facebook. I'm the one talking, and I'm the one who clearly clicked go live on Facebook. So I'm sure that not having that little pop-up that says, hey, by the way, you're on Zoom voluntarily on your account, linking it to your Facebook to go live, because they weren't telling me that I was going live on Facebook. That's probably unauthorized sharing of information with third parties, right? Or maybe when I logged into Zoom and it says, would you like to sign in on Facebook? And then you sign on Facebook. And then when you do that, if you read the terms and service of any company, what they're really doing is they're getting access to your entire Facebook friends list. So then they can retarget those people and advertise to them. This is all known shit. This is all shit that every developer does, right? And then this other argument, alleged failure to prevent unwanted meeting disruptions. We know what this was too. People would like photobomb your Zoom meeting. So some asshole would sit there on Zoom and just type in join meeting 123-67943, join meeting 9243. And once in a while, he would get a hit, somebody who was actually on Zoom, and he would accidentally guess their number, or he would have the meeting number from somebody else. He would pop onto the screen and he'd be, mooning people or giving them a little picture of his junk or something like that. Horrible, annoying, but not the end of the world. Didn't ruin my life. We had it happen one time where we were on a meeting. We usually use the same meeting ID for our coaching group, and somebody, I don't know if it was a disgruntled client or friend of a friend or somebody that just wanted to mess with us, they jumped on the meeting and showed us their butt, and I had to click them off and delete them from the room and then not allow them to come on. These are just kind of the costs of doing business with an open platform. You can use Zoom for free. I pay for it because I want kind of all the upgraded features, but it's like, come on, guys. This is technology. We know this stuff happens. We know that when you're interfacing with multiple platforms, every company is going to get it wrong somewhere. Like, oh, hey, did Scott authorize on the Facebook side or the Apple side to give us the credentials for Zoom to talk to this? We all know nothing's private. We all know if you use an iPhone or a Google phone, they're tracking you, they're looking at your pictures, they're stealing your information so Facebook and Instagram can advertise to you more aggressively. Like the need for this class action lawsuit, I'm guessing, obviously it didn't go to trial because they settled. That's why everything says alleged. I'm guessing it's all just bullshit. But a bunch of corporate lawyers got together. It only takes 2 people to sign on to start a class action lawsuit. At least that's the case in California. And then, they sue Zoom. They tell them they're going to drag them through court, drag their name through the mud, or it's like the mob. Just give us a couple $1 million. We'll distribute it to anybody that was on Zoom. And I think I looked it up. I didn't fill out the whole thing. It's like they're going to give me $11, right? So for me being so wronged that my information was shared with an unauthorized third party, or that I was so tragically mentally destroyed that somebody mooned me and showed me their butt on an unauthorized third-party addition to a Zoom meeting, I'm due $11. And I'm sure the law firm that's handling this, whoever it is, I'm sure they're making millions and millions of dollars. It's just gross, right? And what does that mean to us as the consumer? It just means, surprise, surprise, Zoom's going to raise their prices by a couple bucks in order to compensate themselves for this lawsuit. It's just silly. I think what do they call these? Trial attorneys that are just constantly trying to find nitpicky stuff that they can sue for. And like in California, it runs rampant in the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, where it's like, you have to have a mirror this tall and this ramp and blah, 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 blah. And there's just lawyers that will go around, not disabled, and try to find these little variances where it's like, well, the city said the sidewalk had to be at this slope, but then the state said this, but then your ramp wasn't correctly here. And it's like, all right, well, can a wheelchair go up and down into Wendy's? Yeah, sure, it can go into Wendy's. Cool. Why do we have a problem? It's like, well, you were off by 2 inches, and that could prevent somebody with a wheelchair with this handicap from getting into Wendy's, and so we're going to shake you down for money. This happens all the time. And this is just like a bigger, worse version of that. And it grosses me out, and it's one of the reasons things get so expensive. So, anyway.
Disneyland got sued for not having park maps that were accessible for blind people.
Wait, okay. We have to fact check this. Wait.
I could bring it up. They now have like ones that you can touch and have like raised bumps on them.
All right. Tell me the whole story. So for those of you that don't know, Chris is a huge enthusiast of roller coasters and theme parks. You ever want to know anything about a theme park? Let's just try this. We'll fact check him too. Hey, Chris, when did the roller coaster Viper at Magic Mountain come out?
91.
We gotta look. Okay. Release Viper roller coaster Magic Mountain. I'm gonna laugh my ass off if you're right. He's shaking his head over here. He's like, I know I'm right. The coaster guy. All right. Where would I find
RCDB.com.
RCDB. RCDB.com. What is this, by the way? Oh, this is a roller coaster database. Interesting. All right, let's look up Viper. Viper, Six Flags, Magic Mountain, Valencia, California. Haha. All right, where's Viper? Oh, you're 1 year off. 4/7/1990. I can't even believe you got in the right decade. But you let me down, Chris, but I still love you. All right, so tell us more about this Disney story. That's on you, Chris.
Article says, in September 2010, 3 visually impaired women who have been long patrons of the Walt Disney Company's theme parks and websites filed a class action against 2 Walt Disney companies, alleging that their websites referring to their theme parks, hotels, and restaurants are inaccessible to the visually impaired. But then, okay, so that's for the websites. It continues about the park maps somewhere.
So they sued because the park maps and the website were not easily accessible to blind people?
Yeah. And the accessibility to the blind on websites was a huge thing. Most web providers have fixed that now and just kind of build it into whatever you're building.
And look, guys, to be clear, I want blind people to have a great life. Blind people want to go to Disneyland and ride the rides. That's awesome. But I'm going to take a wild guess that if you're blind, just wild guess, you're not driving to Disneyland, getting out, going up, buying a ticket, walking through the park, finding your way to Space Mountain, and then riding Space Mountain, and then leaving the park and getting home. I'm just guessing no blind person on their own in the history of the world has ever accomplished that. So I think it probably goes without saying that if you're going to an amusement park and you're blind, you probably have a guide, or the theme park probably provides a docent to help you get through the park. Who the fuck cares if the theme park maps are in Braille? Like, that just doesn't make a lick of sense. I can't think of a worse place to go being blind than Disneyland, and not because it wouldn't be a rush to ride the rides, because I've rode all the rides in Disneyland with my eyes closed, but it would be miserable walking around there with the number of people and the lines and trying to find your way. So how silly. Yeah, this shit's just silly.
Yeah, I'm looking more at it. I'm looking more at it, and it's mostly that they were mad that Disney refused to provide Braille menus, schedules, maps, and more.
Yeah.
So.
Well, how about this? Any blind person out there listening to podcasts who wants to go to Disneyland, Chris will be your docent. I will pay for his ticket, and he will walk you around Disneyland, and you guys can ride all the rides together. Much easier solution than a class action lawsuit against Disney and having them have to reprint everything in the park to be Braille friendly. Just silly. All right. Anyway, next topic. Do we even have to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse? Here's the only thing I want to say about this. We won't even make this a clip. There's a lot of super smart people that I know, mostly on the left, who I trust them. In other circumstances, I would trust them to give me a fair and balanced, no pun intended, actually pun intended, fair and balanced analysis of a current event or something that's going on in the news, the media, politics, courtroom drama, whatnot. I trust these people. And I believe that they believe wholeheartedly what they believe, and they're not trying to spin some agenda. But the fact that after a year of this Kyle Rittenhouse news being in the news, after the trial, after he was exonerated and the claims of self-defense held up in court, after endless media coverage, I still cannot believe how many informed friends I have that lean left on politics who still think Kyle Rittenhouse's victims were black. And it really shouldn't matter at all to the outcome of the case, but because that's the angle that the media has been talking about so much, it drives me bonkers. And Glenn Greenwald, who I've mentioned on this podcast several times, is one of my favorite writers. He's an awesome reporter. He's a liberal. He was the original writer, one of the original founders of The Guardian, which is a very left-leaning publication. He was the person who released all the Snowden original interviews and information. Just a really fantastic reporter and an amazing guy from what I can tell. I've listened to him on many podcasts. I've read hundreds of his articles. Really, really great guy. And he's starting to move a little bit more and more right because he's seeing just the craziness and the content creation, not reporting, not journalism, content creation, and the narrative that CNN and MSNBC are trying to spin. And don't get me wrong, when I have the unfortunate circumstance of tuning into a Fox News or a right-leaning publication, they definitely have their slant. They definitely have their angle on the story they're trying to tell. But when I tune into MSNBC or CNN, which I hate just as much, it's like the facts don't even exist. So if you're trying to spin a narrative that Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist vigilante who was out to kill a bunch of African Americans at a BLM rally, and then the facts show a narrative that's counter to that, aka he shot 3 white people, the facts have to mean something. And Glenn Greenwald writes this amazing article, we'll link to it, about how for much of the country, about half, depending on the event, because conservatives, libertarians, Republicans do the same thing, the facts just don't matter anymore. And like I was saying earlier in the show, started out with a shout out to 3 of my friends who are on the more progressive left. It worries me that a lot of times we don't even have a common starting ground on a conversation because like the facts are in question, and the facts shouldn't be in question. Everybody knew 24 hours after Kyle Rittenhouse shot those 3 people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, whether you believe it was self-defense or it was murder or wherever you fall on the political spectrum or wherever you fall on the spectrum of the events of that night, who he shot was never in dispute. It was 3 guys that look whiter than me. And so the only thing I want to say on this is that facts matter. I think all of us, anytime any of these things come up, shootings, gun violence, police shootings, the Jussie Smollett case, right? Racial hate crimes. Do all of these things happen and they're horrible? Absolutely. But should we all just take a step back, maybe wait a few days for the fact pattern to be established, and then actually look at the facts? Yeah, that would probably be really important. All right, enough about that. Oh, next topic. This is so fun. So this is the DHR Pronoun Toolkit 2021. And a doctor actually sent this to me anonymously, meaning they will be anonymous to you, but I know who they are. A doctor that works for LA County Hospital sent this to me, and I took this from a PDF that this individual sent me, and I put it here in a Google document because I wanted to be able to save it. So some of the coding and some of the graphics look a little bit off, but I can guarantee you this is factual. This is the source document. I didn't mess with any of this. And, in a time of a pandemic, when Gavin Newsom is telling us that the world is falling and Omicron is coming and we need to focus on our public health systems and everybody now needs to have, double boosted vaccinations or whatever the new terminology is, when the medical industry and the medical community and the healthcare community is under such weight and stress from this horrible disease, the big initiative at the end of 2021 is to make sure that everybody within the Los Angeles County Department of Human Resources is getting this information out to everybody that works for the LA County Department of Health Services about Pronoun Toolkit 2021. So the Board of Supervisors proclaimed October 20th, 2021 as International Pronouns Day. This is really a thing, Chris? Is this where we are? We need International Pronouns Day? My new pronouns are Jedi and asshole. Okay, I'm gonna start putting that on my Instagram. My new stated pronouns are Jedi and asshole. It will be acknowledged every third Wednesday in October. This proclamation acknowledges the importance of using gender-inclusive language, blah, 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 blah. Most people think rarely about how pronouns are used. Well, that's because for pretty much all of human history, there was men and women. It's only in the last 6 months to 18 months, depending on what circles you run in, that this has become controversial. Go ahead, Chris.
Disneyland changed their in-park verbiage from ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls to dreamers of all ages.
Wait. So before they start Fantasmic or whatever, and they would always say on ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the amazing world of Disney brings you what's it called? The big...
Yeah, Fantasmic.
Fantasmic, yeah. So they don't say that anymore?
No, they say dreamers of all ages.
Dreamers of all ages. What the fuck? All right, so the guidance that the doctor that I was talking to got from his supervisors and from HR is like, hey, yeah, this 24-page document on pronouns and pronoun equality, we don't need you to memorize the whole thing, but it's really, really important, really, really important that you at least go through all the terminology. And they didn't quite say there'll be a quiz in order for you to keep your job here, but they did insinuate that, like, if you're not familiar with this terminology, there could be consequences. And obviously we have our LGBTQ plus. Okay. Then we have a SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity expression, GNC, gender nonconforming, FTML, female to male, MTF, male to female, sex assigned at birth, gender, a person's internal understanding of their gender or perception of person's gender identity, which may include male, female, combination of gender identity, gender expression, sex. I mean, I'm confused, and I have a lot of friends that are gay, and we'll just leave it at that. But I'm confused. Heterosexual, straight, heterosexism, lesbian, gay, homosexual, homophobia, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, queer, sex binary, gender binary roles, on and on and on. Transgender, transsexual, transgender men, transgender woman, gender nonconforming, non-binary, NBC, gender queer, gender variant, gender fluid, two-spirit, drag queen king, cross-dresser, and androgynous, andro, intersex, gender dysphoria transition, coming out, outing, closeted, conversion therapy, pronouns, intersectional ally, on and on and on. 3 pages of terms that everybody that works for the LA County Health Services should be memorizing. And 2 things. 1, in the middle of a pandemic that's supposedly taxing our entire healthcare system, is this really the number 1 priority, right? I know 2 people that are trans. If they happen to be coming into the hospital in order to get a COVID test or get treated for COVID, they don't give a shit what you call them. They don't give a shit. They just want treatment, okay? And on top of that, this idea of like medical establishments now telling doctors that gender is an identity and not formed by chromosomes, as in like that famous line from Kindergarten Cop, boys have a penis, women have a vagina, or girls have a vagina. I think he's like, you should interject that right here, Chris, that 2-second clip from Kindergarten Cop where the little boy's like,
boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
The fact that 1, that's controversial is crazy to me. And 2, telling medical industry experts that they have to believe that gender is a person's understanding and that maybe that's fluid and that can change. How does that affect medical procedures, right? If a woman comes in an emergency labor, is the doctor supposed to stop and ask like, hey, do you identify as a man or a woman? Are you sure you're pregnant? It's just craziness. I don't really understand it. And I don't care. If you're a transsexual man, help me out here, Chris. Transsexual man means that you were born a woman, but then you become a man, right?
Transgendered man.
Transgender. Okay. Can't say transsexual. Okay. Transgender man. If you're a transgender man, meaning you were born a woman and you weren't assigned at birth, you were born a woman. If you want to grow a penis and lop off your boobs, I think that's kind of weird. It's not what I would choose to do, but great, do it. If you're a transgender woman, and meaning you were born a man and you want to chop off your dong, turn it inside out so you have a vagina, cool. God be with you. But medically, if you walked into LA County Hospital and they're like, hey, really weird situation developing. We have a COVID vaccine that's 100% effective. You have to take 1 shot. You will never get COVID, guaranteed. Problem is, because it's an mRNA vaccine, meaning it works with your DNA, there's a different vaccine for women and a different vaccine for men. Which one do you want? I'm pretty sure most people would go with the one that would affect them most accurately, meaning the birth that they, or the sex that they were at birth, right? So the fact that this just makes its way into our medical community, it's super weird. And look, I'm sure there's stuff way out of my league that are actual medical and psychological issues that affect people that have these different pronoun variations. And it's important that those people get treatment to the best of our ability. But in the middle of a pandemic, should this be the number one, the number one push by the Board of Supervisors for, you know, what's going on in the LA County Health Services? And it's just weird. It's just weird. And not that these two are closely correlated, but this idea of changing titles, you know, a man can be a woman can be a man. It just, I think it's such a dangerous precedent for being able to deal with factual reality, right? So going back to the Kyle Rittenhouse, when we can't even start from a point of agreed upon facts for a legal case, it's hard to have a conversation about what's going on politically, socially. when we can't even have a conversation of shared facts from a man is a man, a woman's a woman, a man's born with a penis, a woman's born with a vagina. When you can't even have that conversation without potentially being labeled homophobic or trans exclusionary or a bigot or a racist or whatever the new term of the day is to vilify people, it's just really dangerous. And I think it's silly. So those are Scott's thoughts for today. That's all I wanted to get to. Love you guys lots. If you did stick around this long, first of all, thank you very much. Click the like button, leave a comment. It means a lot to me, and we'll talk soon.